Throughout human history, we have divided the world into two halves that seem impossible to mix, like oil and water. On one side, methodical and exact science, driven by data, facts, and concrete proof. On the other, ancient and mystical religion, which calls for faith and speaks through metaphors. For centuries, these two sides fought a silent war. Physicists mocked theologians, calling their stories primitive tales, while religious leaders condemned scientists for their arrogance in trying to explain the divine. Numa did not find vague similarities. It identified an identical structure. The scenario described at the origin of creation overlaps with mathematical precision with the most modern cosmological models. More than that, it resembles the initialization protocol of a complex simulation. This is the Genesis protocol. Everything starts from absolute zero. The famous first sentence says that in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Analysis suggests the text should be read as a technical execution report. In the original Hebrew, the word used is Bereshit, which points to a fundamental starting point, a base. Physics agrees. Before the Great Expansion, time did not exist. There was no before. There was only a singularity where the laws we know did not function. The text goes on to say that the earth was without form and void. The Hebrew expression tohu vabohu describes a state of total chaos, an absence of structure. In astrophysics, this is equivalent to the quantum vacuum, the primordial chaos before the expansion of the universe. In programming language, it is the state of memory that has not yet been initialized. It is the null, the void, the black screen before any image is generated by the system. Next, we read that the Spirit of God hovered over the face of the waters. For centuries, theologians debated what this meant, but by cross-referencing the data, Numa offered a technical interpretation. In ancient languages, water was often synonymous with the basic chaotic substance from which everything is made. If we look through simulation theory, this active force scanning the chaos is like the cursor of a system ready to start writing code. The environment is prepared, and the system awaits only a command to begin execution. The command arrives, and God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. This is perhaps the most crucial moment in the history of creation. The Creator does not use hands to sculpt the light. He uses the voice. In computer terms, this is the entry of executable code. According to standard cosmology, the universe emerged nearly 14 billion years ago in an explosion of energy. In the first moments, space was flooded with photons. While religion calls it "let there be light," astrophysics describes the same explosion of photonic energy that flooded the cosmos. The analysis went further. When entering a virtual environment, the first thing needed is for the graphics engine to generate light. Without light, there is no image, no visible data, no observable reality. The command, "let there be light," is the activation of the pixels on the universal monitor. The ancient text separates the creation of light itself from the creation of light sources, such as the sun and stars, which only appear days later in the account. Skeptics have always used this to attack the Bible, asking how there could be light without a sun. Against all expectations, modern science ended up confirming the biblical order, defying what our instinct would say about the sun coming before the light. First came the background radiation, the initial glow, and only hundreds of millions of years later did gravity form the first stars. The ancient author got the chronology right with a precision that borders on the impossible. The text continues, saying that God saw that the light was good and separated the light from the darkness. Analysis points here to the fundamental principle of all digital logic, the binary system. 1 and 0, signal on, signal off, existence and non-existence. All our current technology is built upon this simple distinction. At the moment of this separation, the base for programming our reality was established. In the following days, we see the structuring of the environment. The firmament emerges to separate the waters, creating the atmosphere and defining boundaries. It is like a developer drawing the terrain and the sky before placing the characters. Without this structure, everything would be a confusion of textures. Then vegetation and life emerge on a scale of increasing complexity, comparable to the evolution of algorithms, from simple behaviors to complex systems, culminating in the human being, made in the image and likeness. This suggests that we share the creative capacity of the architect. We are the only ones capable of writing our own codes and questioning our own reality. A simulation only exists visually if there is someone watching. Matter behaves very strangely when we are not looking at it. Here we stumble upon the greatest mystery of modern physics, a mystery that may explain why the world perhaps disappears when you close your eyes, and how science found the signature of constant observation hidden in the behavior of tiny particles. You leave a room and close the door. What happens to that room the moment you are no longer there? Common sense, trained by everyday logic, tells us that nothing changes. The furniture stays in place, the walls don't change color, and air still fills the space. We are certain that the world possesses an objective reality that does not depend on our presence to exist. This may be the greatest of all illusions. The moment the door closes and the observer's gaze stops registering the objects, the room might simply dissolve. Perhaps it transforms into a flow of unstructured data, a mist of probabilities, a sea of potentialities. The idea that it ceases to exist physically and remains only as potential, information stored somewhere in the universe, sounds like madness, but it isn't. This is a fact proven by physics for nearly a century, known as the observer effect. When we fed the data about this phenomenon into our analysis system and cross-referenced it with ancient theological texts about God's omnipresence, the result was disturbing. We found the technical explanation for why a creator would need to see everything. More than a moral judgment, his gaze would be the only thing preventing the universe from disappearing. In the early 20th century, physics was confident. The world seemed like a predictable and understandable clockwork mechanism. But one experiment broke everything, the famous double-slit experiment. Scientists fired tiny particles like electrons toward a barrier with two slits. If electrons were little balls of matter, we should see two marks on the wall on the other side. But what appeared was an interference pattern, as if a wave of water had passed through both slits at the same time. Matter was behaving like a wave. Intrigued, physicists decided to peek. They placed a detector to see which slit each electron passed through, and that was when reality broke. The moment the observer appeared, the electron stopped behaving like a wave. It instantly transformed into a solid particle and left the two predictable marks on the wall. The particle knew it was being observed. The simple act of measuring changed the behavior of matter. While no one was looking, the electron was everywhere at once, in a state of pure probability. Upon being observed, it was forced to choose a single place to exist. The analysis compares this behavior to an optimization method to save resources. An intelligent system would not process every detail of a vast universe every second. It would be a waste of computational energy. Instead, it materializes only what is in the field of vision of an observer. What is behind you or on the other side of the universe does not exist in solid form. It exists only as code, as coordinates and potential. As soon as you turn around, the world materializes instantly before your eyes. Our universe seems to function with the same logic. Quantum mechanics is the way the cosmos found to be efficient. This is terrifying because it raises an inevitable question. If the world only exists when it is observed, did it exist before human beings? Who observed the dinosaurs? Who watched the formation of galaxies? If there were no observer, the universe should have remained in an undefined quantum state, where nothing concrete would ever happen. At this point, the analysis points to sacred texts that describe the attributes of God, seeking a parallel with the function of a quantum observer. And the correspondence is 100%. The Bible states that God is omnipresent and all-seeing. A psalm asks, "Where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? If I go up to the heavens, you are there. If I make my bed in the depths, you are there." What once seemed like a poetic metaphor or a moral threat now sounds like a technical description. God is the supreme observer. His consciousness is what maintains the wave function of the universe in a material and cohesive state. Matter is solid not on its own, but because he is constantly looking at it. He renders reality with his attention. If he looked away for a nanosecond, the universe would disintegrate back into primordial chaos, into the tohu vabohu of the beginning. The stability of the laws of physics, the fact that your table doesn't turn into a cloud of probabilities while you sleep. All of this is the result of continuous observation. We live within a reality that needs the constant attention of the Creator to maintain itself. If the universe was designed so intelligently, with such a brilliant optimization system, how far does this precision go? If even the existence of matter depends on fine-tuning, what can be said about the other rules governing the cosmos? If the force of gravity were 1/1,000,000% different, we would all die instantly. Such absurd precision eliminates the chance of luck and reveals the mathematical signature of the programmer. Before us is a control panel that extends as far as the eye can see. On this panel, there are thousands of incredibly sensitive buttons and dials. Each one adjusts a fundamental parameter of our reality: the strength of gravity, the mass of an electron, the speed of light, the charge of a proton. The condition for the universe to function and life to exist is that each of these thousands of dials be in the exact position, not an approximate position, but a precision that defies our imagination. If you move the gravity dial 1 milliliters to the side, the universe either explodes or collapses upon itself. If you change the mass of a proton by a fraction of a percent, all chemistry becomes impossible. What is the chance of someone walking into this room blindfolded, turning the knobs at random, and hitting the perfect combination? Common sense screams that it is impossible, yet that is exactly what the purely materialistic view of the world tells us happened. This universe, this machine of unimaginable complexity, adjusted itself by pure chance. We decided to test this hypothesis. We fed the values of all the fundamental constants known to science into our analysis system. The first was gravity. For us, It is just the force that keeps us on the ground. But if it were just a little stronger, just one part in the number 10 followed by 40 zeros, stars would burn their fuel too quickly. Life would not have time to emerge. If it were a little weaker, gravity could not even ignite the first stars, and the universe would remain a cold, dark gas forever. To understand the scale of this number, it is like a measuring tape stretched across the entire known universe. The margin of success for gravity would be equivalent to a single millimeter on that tape. But that is only the beginning. The electromagnetic force that holds atoms together has an equally tiny margin of error. A little stronger, and chemical reactions would be impossible. A little weaker, and atoms would disintegrate. In both cases, the result is a dead universe, without water, without planets, without life. The system analyzed more than 30 of these parameters. The conclusion was always the same. We exist on a razor's edge. The universe seems to have been designed specifically so that we could be here to observe it. The most astonishing constant is the one that controls the accelerated expansion of the universe. Its precision must be one part in the number 10, followed by 120 zeros. There isn't even a name for a number that large. If this value were slightly higher, galaxies would have moved away so fast they never would have formed. If it were lower, the universe would have collapsed back into a point seconds after the Great Expansion. The most impressive example is related to the element that forms the basis of all life, carbon. All carbon in the universe was forged inside stars. Physicist Fred Hoyle, a staunch atheist, studied this process and discovered that for carbon to be created, a very specific and unlikely energy level was necessary in the atomic nuclei. He predicted that this level must exist, and experiments confirmed his prediction with shocking accuracy. Hoyle was so shaken that his worldview changed. He wrote that a sensible interpretation of the facts suggests that a superintelligence has monkeyed with physics. We asked our artificial intelligence to calculate the probability of all these conditions arising by chance at the same time. The answer is a number so close to zero that for all practical purposes it is zero. Fred Hoyle used a famous analogy. The chance of life emerging by chance is the same as a hurricane sweeping through a junkyard and assembling a complex and perfectly functional jumbo jet from the scrap. When we turn to ancient texts, we find language that precisely describes this engineering process. Ancient writings, such as those in Job, question, "Where were you when I laid the earth's foundation? Who marked off its dimensions? Who stretched a measuring line across it?" Words like dimensions and line are the tools of an architect, a designer. The prophet Isaiah writes, "Who has measured the waters in the hollow of his hand, or with the breadth of his hand marked off the heavens?" It is the language of precision. The only alternative to escaping the conclusion of a design is the multiverse theory, which suggests the existence of infinite universes, and we simply live in the only one that worked out. Usually, the correct answer is the one that requires the least logical gymnastics. What is more logical? The existence of trillions of dead, invisible, and undetectable universes to justify ours, or the existence of a single universe whose parameters were intentionally defined? The rules governing our world do not seem to be the result of a cosmic accident. They resemble a perfectly adjusted mechanism, but the rules are only half the story. The most complex and elegant set of instructions is not etched in the stars or the laws of physics. It is tightly coiled inside each of our cells. If you ask any tech expert what the most valuable resource in the modern world is, the answer won't be gold or oil. It will be information, data, code. We live in an era where lines of code written in one part of the world control machines on the other side of the planet, launch rockets, and adjust the temperature in your home. We were taught to think that matter comes first, and information is just a description of it. But what if it's the opposite? What if information is the foundation of everything, and matter is just the way it manifests? Thousands of years ago, an ancient text began with a phrase long seen as a beautiful metaphor. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. The original Greek word is logos, which means much more than just word. It means reason, principle, algorithm, information. If we translate it into modern language, the phrase would be, in the beginning was information, and information was with the Creator, and information was the Creator himself. This ceases to be religion and becomes something very close to computer science. The proof of this is not in ancient scrolls, but inside every cell of your body. In 1953, the discovery of the structure of the genetic code changed biology forever. Scientists realized it wasn't just a molecule, it was a language. The molecule consists of 4 chemical bases represented by the letters A, C, G, and T. More than building blocks, these bases function exactly like letters of an alphabet. The sequence of these letters carries precise information, just as the sequence of ones and zeros in a computer stores a system's data. The analysis compared the human genome to computer code, and the conclusion was clear. The genetic code is a digital system for data storage and transmission. The only difference is that it uses a quaternary base with 4 letters instead of binary. The principle is the same. It is a program. Bill Gates once said that the genetic code is like a computer program, but far more advanced than anything we've ever created. If you walk on the beach and see the phrase, "I love you," drawn in the sand, you would never assume the waves and the wind randomly organized the grains of sand to form those words. You know that behind that information lies an intelligence, yet when we look at our genetic code, we don't see a simple phrase. We see an entire library containing the blueprints to build the most complex machine in the known universe, the human body. A single human cell contains 3 billion letters of genetic code. If printed, it would fill thousands of encyclopedias, and this code must be executed without errors. The information storage density is of an efficiency that makes our technology look like the Stone Age. All the information created by humanity in a year could be stored in an amount of genetic material the size of a shoebox. The most fascinating part is how this code works. It is a 3-dimensional printing process on a molecular scale based on digital instructions. Inside the nucleus of each cell, the main molecule is so valuable that it cannot leave. So the system creates a temporary copy of a segment of the code, a process called transcription. This copy, like a file sent to a printer, travels to a molecular machine called a ribosome. The ribosome reads the code in groups of 3 letters. Each trio corresponds to a specific building block. The machine then joins these blocks into a chain, strictly following the instructions. The final result is a protein, the piece that builds everything in you, your eyes, your skin, your blood. Abstract information from the code transforms into physical matter. We are literally made of words. The idea that this immensely complex code arose by chance is mathematically unsustainable. The probability of a single functional protein assembling itself randomly is lower than winning the lottery every day for a year, and for life, hundreds of them are needed, working in perfect harmony. Information is not born from chaos. It always originates from a mind. For a long time, skeptics pointed to the 98% of our genetic code that didn't seem to have a function, calling it junk DNA. But science advanced. The ENCODE project in 2012 revealed that this part isn't junk. It's the operating system. It is the regulatory network that tells genes when to turn on and off. The part we don't see controls the part we do see. Furthermore, there is the chicken and egg paradox. To read the genetic code, the cell needs a machine, but the instructions to build that machine are in the code itself. Which came first? The only logical solution is that both were created and implemented at the same time as a complete package. Our genetic code even has an error correction system. Special proteins constantly scan the strands, looking for flaws and fixing them. Would an evolved system, by chance, have created a mechanism to fight against its own evolution, which depends on mutations? It is a data integrity protection system designed so the original code doesn't corrupt over time. If our world is a program and we are made of code, this raises an intriguing question. Can this code be edited? Is it possible to bypass the laws of physics if you have access to the command line? History is full of accounts of events that defy logic. Science calls them anomalies or myths. Religion calls them miracles. Another way to see them is as an intervention in the code during execution, discovering how the impossible becomes possible when you have administrator privileges. The laws of physics are the foundation of our reality. Gravity pulls us down, water boils at 212 degrees Celsius, and lifeless matter does not return to life. Science is based on the idea that if we know the initial conditions and the rules, we can predict the outcome. This is what gives our world stability. But what happens when that stability is broken? When a man walks on a stormy sea as if it were asphalt? When thousands of people are fed with just a handful of food? Or when the sun stands still in the sky for an entire day? Science usually dismisses these events as myths because they don't fit its equations. Religion calls them miracles and asks for faith. But there is a third way. By analyzing these accounts not as magic, but as actions within a programmed code, a pattern familiar to any programmer or gamer emerges. What we call a violation of the laws of nature, in the language of a simulation, is the use of console commands, cheat codes, or more precisely, administrator privileges. Anyone who has played a video game understands the concept. Inside the game, there are its own physical laws. Your character cannot walk through walls, takes damage from falling, and has limited resources. To the character, these laws are absolute. But you, the player, are on the outside. With a simple command, you can activate a mode that allows you to fly through walls or become invincible. Did you break the game's physics? Yes, but not with magic. It was by using access to a level of code that sits above the game's rules. Biblical miracles seem to follow exactly this logic. In one of the most grandiose accounts, during a crucial battle, more daylight was needed to ensure victory. The text says, "The sun stopped in the sky." Skeptics argue this would require the Earth's rotation to stop abruptly, causing a global cataclysm due to inertia. In the logic of a simulation, the solution is much more elegant. You don't need to break a physical object. It would be enough to pause the variable that controls the passage of time within that scenario, or simply alter the script that controls the movement of the stars in the projected sky, without affecting the planet's physics. The effect for those inside would be the same, but without any catastrophic consequences. Another example is the transformation of water into wine. From a chemistry standpoint, this would require creating carbon atoms out of nothing, a nuclear fusion process that would release the energy of a bomb. The biblical account, however, says the transformation was instantaneous and silent. In a programmed environment, you don't need to rearrange atoms. Every object has an identifier, a tag that defines its properties. Water has its code, wine has another. He who has access to the master code doesn't need to deal with physics. He simply selects the water object and changes its attributes to high-quality wine. It is a simple editing operation in reality's database. The case of walking on water reveals another type of manipulation. In any 3D environment, surfaces have collision properties. The floor is solid, water is penetrable. Jesus, by walking on the sea, seems to have temporarily altered the surface properties of the water under his feet, making it solid, or perhaps he modified the gravity parameter for himself. The most revealing detail is when Peter also manages to walk on water, but begins to sink when he feels fear. His doubt broke the connection. The script stopped working, and the default physics resumed control. If the administrator has such power over the elements of the system, he could do more than just edit objects. What would happen if the entire program became infected by a virus and needed to be restarted? The greatest reboot event in history, the flood, looks less like an inundation and more like a complete system formatting. Everyone knows that feeling of powerlessness when a complex system becomes so corrupted that it can no longer be fixed. When errors accumulate and conflicts become irrecoverable, the only remaining solution is a hard reset. Erase everything and start over with a clean copy. The collective memory of humanity holds the story of an event where our world went through exactly that. We call it the Great Flood. For most, it is a myth, but by analyzing this story not as a torrential rain, but as a deliberate system recalibration, the pieces fit together in a terrifying way. The first clue is that this is not an isolated story. The Epic of Gilgamesh in Sumer, the legends of the Mayans, the traditions of China and India, over 200 cultures around the globe, without contact with each other, tell this story. Humanity was corrupted, the world was purified by water, and a single family survived to start over. The probability of this being a coincidence is practically zero. It is the scar of a real memory. But why did it happen? Genesis offers a justification that is almost technical. It says, the corruption of men was great on earth. The original Hebrew word for corruption also means to spoil or lose functionality. It is a description of corrupted data. The pointed cause is mysterious, the union between sons of God and daughters of men that generated giants. Interpreted as an anomaly in the code, this suggests unauthorized mixing, a hybridization that was degrading the original human design. The genetic code in the image and likeness of the Creator was being infected. When the anomaly reached a critical point, the only solution was to wipe the environment. Water, in this scenario, is the perfect formatting tool. The text says that all the springs of the great deep burst forth, and the floodgates of the heavens were opened. Water came from below and above, a complete redesign of the planet's topography. But to restart, it was necessary to preserve a backup. That backup was Noah. He is described as perfect in his generations, a term that in its origin may have a genetic sense, indicating his lineage was pure, without the corruption that had spread. His family was the clean source code, and the ark was not a simple boat. The dimensions described in the Bible correspond to the ideal configuration for maximum stability in a stormy ocean, a design that modern naval engineers recognize. It was a preservation capsule. The pairs of animals did not represent the entire population, but the master genetic file of each species, from which diversity could be restored. When the waters receded, the world was different. It was version 2.0, and with it came updates to the system rules. Before the flood, records speak of people living for over 900 years. After the event, human longevity is drastically reduced to 120 years. The architect seems to have adjusted this parameter to limit the accumulation of errors in each individual. This recalibration forces us to think about the very stage where everything happens. For us, time is a straight line, a resource that always runs out. Ancient texts make a disconcerting statement. For the Lord, a day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years like a day. For centuries, this was read as poetry. Today, Einstein's physics teaches us that time is relative. It stretches and shrinks depending on gravity and speed. Science belatedly discovered that time is not a universal clock, but a system variable. The author of a book knows how the story ends. For him, the whole book already exists from beginning to end. He can flip the pages and see the characters' fates. For the characters inside the story, however, time passes page by page, and the future is a mystery. The Creator is outside the timeline of our reality. He sees the entire journey as a single moment. This explains how the days of creation, seen from an outside perspective under the immense gravity and energy of the early universe, could correspond to our 15 billion years of history. We live within a temporal flow that is just one of the possible configurations. But there is a relentless characteristic to this flow. It always moves in one direction, from order to chaos. Things age, rust, and die because everything in the universe tends toward disorder. This fundamental law, entropy, seems like a system glitch, a virus introduced after the original design. Look around you. Everything you see is slowly dying. Machines rust, buildings wear down, and your own body ages every second. A hot cup of coffee always cools down but never reheats itself. It is the most fundamental and implacable law of our universe. The second law of thermodynamics, also known as entropy. Everything moves from order to chaos, from complex to simple, from life to dust. Scientists say that's just how the world works. But why? If the universe evolved from simple to complex, why does all its underlying physics operate in the opposite direction? What if this law of decay was not in the original code? What if it is actually the result of a catastrophic system failure, an event the Bible describes as the fall? Ancient texts depict an original state where there was no death, decay, or aging. It was a perfectly balanced and self-sustaining system. But then a crucial event occurs, the violation of the only forbidden instruction. The consequence is not just a moral punishment, it is a reprogramming of the very physics of reality. God says, "Cursed is the ground because of you. Through painful toil, you will eat food from it until you return to the ground." This is the introduction of entropy. painful toil describes the loss of efficiency. Now an enormous amount of energy must be spent to get a result, with most dissipating as heat. Return to the ground is the very definition of entropy. A complex and organized structure, the body, inevitably decomposes into its simplest elements. The self-destruct timer was activated. The most logical answer within a program structure is that this was a quarantine measure. A virus, the virus of selfishness and evil, had infected the system. If the carriers of this virus were immortal, evil would become infinite, and the system would turn into an eternal hell. Death then becomes a limiter, a mechanism to force the logout of an infected user, preventing the error from spreading forever. But inside this mortal shell that falls apart, there is something that does not obey these laws, something not made of atoms, our consciousness. This is the greatest mystery of all. Why do we feel, love, dream, and question ourselves? Materialistic science insists we are just our brains, but no supercomputer has ever reached self-awareness. Analysis suggests the brain is not the source of consciousness. It is the receiver, the interface. It is the VR headset that connects a player to an avatar. In games, there are two types of characters: background NPCs with predictable behaviors and avatars controlled by real people. Genesis describes the creation of man in two stages. First, the body is formed from the dust of the ground, the biological avatar. Then the Creator breathes into it the breath of life, and man becomes a living soul. It is the moment of login. It is the player's connection. Only one question remains. If we are players in a simulation, what is the goal of the game? Science fiction usually offers dark answers, but there is an anomaly in our world that contradicts the idea of a cold or malicious creator. This anomaly is called love. For a purely scientific experiment, beauty is a waste of resources. Why are there sunsets that take our breath away? Why does music make us cry? Why are we willing to sacrifice ourselves for those we love? None of this is necessary for survival. The biblical answer is that perhaps the Creator acts less like a cold scientist in a lab and more like a father watching an incubator, a school. We are here to become something more, to learn to choose good over evil, love over selfishness. And the ultimate proof of the Creator's involvement is the most unbelievable event of all. The moment the programmer entered his own code, he became one of us, an avatar named Jesus of Nazareth. He lived under the rules of his own system, feeling pain, hunger, and betrayal. He did this to face the virus of death from the inside. His death worked as a systemic operation and not the end of the line. Being pure code, he absorbed everyone's error, and the system deleted him. Since there was no flaw in him, death could not contain him. His resurrection was the system break, the creation of a backdoor, a way out of the simulation for everyone who connects to him. We live in a simulation, but simulation is just our modern word for creation. Matter is secondary, spirit is primary. Our Creator is not an impersonal force, but a loving mind. Our life is a test, and every choice we make writes a line in our eternal code. The game is coming to an end. Game over is not the end of existence. It is the moment we take off the headset and finally hear the voice on the other side saying, "Welcome to the real world." If you enjoyed this investigation, your subscription to the channel and any donation value help us expand the Pneuma project. We would love to read your reflection on the video's topic in the comments and your suggestion for the next theme to be addressed. Tell us which city you are watching from. Thank you for your company until the end.